Sweat dripped from the barrel of the officer's service weapon, aimed squarely at the head of a man pinned against the cold concrete. Handcuffs bit deeply into the suspect's wrists as the arrogant rookie sneered, absolutely convinced he had just taken down a major cartel player. He completely ignored the captive's calm, chilling warning. "You are making a career-ending mistake." Seconds later, a fleet of armored federal SUVs shattered the perimeter, and heavily armed tactical agents descended, their laser sights painting the rookie cop's chest. Sweltering mid-July heat baked the cracked asphalt of West Baltimore, radiating in shimmering waves that distorted the abandoned industrial park on Fayette Street. Inside an unmarked, rusted surveillance van parked 2 blocks away, Supervisory Special Agent Doyle Adler wiped condensation from his brow, staring intently at the flickering feeds of 4 hidden cameras. Operation Iron Clasp had been meticulously pieced together over 18 grueling months, targeting the Holloway Syndicate, a ruthless narcotics and weapons trafficking ring that had turned the city's port into their personal playground. Everything had led to this exact hour. Deep inside the rotting guts of Warehouse 4, Supervisory Special Agent Kendrick Hayes was playing the most dangerous role of his decorated 12-year career with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Kendrick, a 34-year-old black man with a sharp, calculating intellect and a former military background, was dressed down to blend perfectly into the gritty underworld. He wore a faded charcoal hoodie, distressed denim jeans, and scuffed tactical boots. Woven seamlessly into the seam of his collar was a microscopic wire transmitting crisp audio to Adler's earpiece. Kendrick was currently alone in the warehouse's makeshift office, rapidly photographing ledgers and burner phones before the cartel's lieutenants returned from their sweep of the docks. Outside, a perimeter had been established by the local police department, called in strictly for containment and crowd control once the feds initiated the breach. The explicit orders were to hold the line, maintain radio silence, and let the FBI tactical teams execute the takedown. Sitting in a marked cruiser at the western edge of the perimeter was Officer Brantley Wood. Barely 26 years old and boasting less than 3 years on the force, Wood was a powder keg of misplaced ambition and unearned confidence. He possessed a long history of civilian complaints, mostly for aggressive behavior and profiling, that had been conveniently swept under the rug by a heavily burdened internal affairs department. Wood despised perimeter duty. He considered himself a street-smart alpha predator, constantly complaining to his older, exhausted partner, Sergeant Thomas O'Malley, that the suits in the FBI didn't understand real police work. "We're just sitting here while the feds get all the glory, Tommy," Wood griped, his fingers impatiently tapping the steering wheel. He adjusted his tactical vest, checking his service weapon for the 4th time in 10 minutes. "I guarantee you, they're going to botch this. These cartel guys are ghosts. The moment they smell a rat, they'll slip out the back." Sergeant O'Malley let out a long, heavy sigh, not bothering to take his eyes off the rusted chain-link fence ahead of them. "Shut your mouth, Brantley, and watch the alley. That's our job today. The Bureau has their own guys inside. We don't move until Adler gives the green light over the joint channel. Period." Wood scoffed, his jaw clenching with arrogance. He rolled down his window, letting the oppressive, garbage-scented breeze wash over his face. He hated taking orders from federal agents, whom he viewed as arrogant academics who couldn't survive a single night on a regular patrol beat. Suddenly, a burst of static erupted over the local encrypted channel. It wasn't the FBI frequency. It was a local dispatcher relaying a noise complaint from a civilian 2 streets over, completely unrelated to Operation Iron Clasp. But Wood's adrenaline-addled brain misconstrued the transmission. He convinced himself he heard something shifting in the darkness of the alleyway, directly connected to Warehouse 4. His eyes locked onto a side door, propped open by a cinder block. "Did you hear that?" Wood whispered sharply, his hand instinctively dropping to the grip of his Glock 19. "Someone's moving by the loading dock. The feds are missing it." "I didn't hear anything, kid," O'Malley replied, his voice firm but laced with rising panic as Wood unbuckled his seatbelt. "Stay in the damn car. We hold the perimeter. Those are the rules of engagement. Rules of engagement don't mean a thing if the target escapes right under our noses," Wood snapped, violently shoving his door open. "I'm checking it out. Cover me or don't. But I'm not letting a cartel boss walk away while those federal desk jockeys take their sweet time." Before O'Malley could physically grab his partner's tactical vest, Wood was out of the cruiser and sprinting into the shadows, directly violating a direct federal order. He moved with a reckless speed, driven by a desperate hunger for validation and an ingrained prejudice that clouded his tactical judgment. He wasn't thinking about Crossfire. He wasn't thinking about undercover agents. He was only thinking about the commendation he would receive for securing the arrest of the century, all by himself. Inside the warehouse office, Kendrick Hayes carefully slipped the photographed ledgers back into a rusted lockbox, ensuring everything looked exactly as he had found it. He tapped the microphone hidden in his collar twice. "Adler, this is Hayes," Kendrick whispered, his voice steady, carrying the calm authority of a man who had stared down death a dozen times before. "I have the hard evidence. The money trail is documented. I'm ready for exfil. Give the tactical team the green light to breach the front loading bays." "Copy that, Hayes," Adler's voice crackled back in his ear. "HRT is in position. Breach is a go in exactly 90 seconds. Stay out of the main corridor. See you on the other side." Kendrick acknowledged the order, sliding his customized FBI-issued sidearm into his concealed holster at his lower back. He took a deep, steadying breath, preparing to take cover behind a reinforced steel pillar. The operation was going perfectly, until the side door crashed open, tearing off its rusted hinges with a deafening metallic screech. Dust billowed into the dim, fluorescent-lit corridor as Officer Brantley Wood charged through the threshold, his weapon drawn and his flashlight cutting aggressively through the gloom. His heart hammered against his ribs, high on the thrill of the unauthorized breach. He swept the hallway, his boots crunching loudly on the debris-littered concrete, completely ignoring every fundamental principle of stealth. Kendrick heard the violent entry. His tactical instincts immediately registered that this was not the FBI hostage rescue team. They moved with silent, fluid precision, not this clumsy, noisy bravado. Thinking the cartel lieutenants had returned early and discovered the perimeter, Kendrick quickly shifted his position, utilizing the shadows near the office doorway to conceal his silhouette. Wood turned the corner, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness until it hit Kendrick's location. The blinding beam illuminated the black man in the charcoal hoodie. In Wood's deeply biased, adrenaline-fueled mind, he didn't see an undercover federal agent. He didn't evaluate the suspect's calm posture or the distinct lack of a drawn weapon. He saw exactly what his prejudices expected him to see: a young, dangerous street thug guarding the cartel's stash. "Freeze, police! Show me your hands, now!" Wood roared, his voice echoing violently off the concrete walls. His hands trembled slightly on his firearm, the laser sight bouncing erratically across Kendrick's chest. Kendrick didn't flinch. He raised his empty hands slowly, keeping his palms open and facing forward, the universal sign of compliance. He recognized the blue uniform immediately. He realized with a sinking feeling of frustration that a rogue beat cop had shattered the perimeter. "Take a breath, officer," Kendrick said, his voice dropping into a low, authoritative register designed to de-escalate. "I am a friendly. I am an undercover federal agent. My badge and credentials are in my left front pocket. Lower your weapon." Wood scoffed, stepping closer, the barrel of his Glock pointed squarely at the bridge of Kendrick's nose. The arrogance rolled off the young cop in waves. "Yeah, right. Every banger I catch tells me they're working for the CIA. Shut your mouth, get on the ground, and cross your ankles. Do it now, or I swear to God I will drop you right here." Through the earpiece, Adler's panicked voice flared. "Hayes, what the hell is happening? Who is shouting? We don't have eyes on that corridor." "Rogue local PD," Kendrick muttered softly, speaking out of the corner of his mouth to the hidden mic while keeping his eyes locked on the hyper-aggressive cop. "Holding me at gunpoint. Hold the breach, Adler. If HRT comes in hot right now, this kid is going to panic and pull the trigger." "Who the hell are you talking to?" Wood screamed, closing the distance rapidly. Without warning, he lunged forward, grabbing Kendrick violently by the shoulder of his hoodie and violently sweeping his legs out from under him. Kendrick, despite possessing the martial arts training to easily disarm and neutralize the rogue officer in 3 seconds flat, allowed himself to fall. He knew any sudden movement or resistance would give this deeply compromised cop the justification he was clearly desperately looking for. Kendrick hit the hard concrete, biting down on a grunt of pain as his shoulder absorbed the impact. Wood drove his knee directly into the center of Kendrick's spine with agonizing force. The cop yanked Kendrick's arms backward, pulling them at an unnatural, painful angle as he slapped heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists, ratcheting the metal teeth as tight as they would go. "I told you to shut up!" Wood spat, his breath hot and ragged as he leaned over his captive. "You thought you could play me. I know exactly who you are. You're the muscle for Holloway." Kendrick pressed his cheek against the cold, filthy floor, maintaining his terrifyingly calm demeanor. "Officer, I am going to tell you this one final time. I am Supervisory Special Agent Kendrick Hayes, FBI. You are currently interfering in an active federal undercover operation. Reach into my left pocket. Feel the badge. Check your radio. Ask your supervisor. You are making a massive mistake. The only mistake made today was you getting out of bed, boy," Wood sneered, the racial microaggression dripping thickly from his tone. He patted Kendrick down aggressively, completely ignoring the left pocket, as if to deliberately spite the warning. His hands found the concealed holster at Kendrick's lower back. Wood ripped the FBI-issued sidearm away with a triumphant grunt. "Carrying concealed, that's another charge. You're going away for a long time." As Wood patted Kendrick's collar, his thick fingers brushed against the wire. He paused, ripping the tiny microphone and earpiece from Kendrick's shirt, destroying the delicate wiring. "Wearing a wire, huh? Who's on the other end? Your cartel buddies?" Wood laughed, tossing the destroyed earpiece across the room. He reached down to his own shoulder radio, depressing the mic button with a smug smile. "Sergeant O'Malley, this is Wood. I've secured a high-value suspect inside the East Wing, armed, aggressive, but neutralized. Tell those federal stiffs they can come in now and do the paperwork. I did their job for them." Static hissed over the radio before O'Malley's terrified voice broke through. "Wood, what did you just do? The FBI hasn't breached yet. Fall back immediately. That is a direct order." Wood rolled his eyes, turning the volume down on his radio. He looked down at Kendrick, who was staring up at him, with eyes as cold and unforgiving as deep ocean ice. "Your sergeant just tried to save your career," Kendrick said softly. "You just destroyed it. And when that door opens, you're going to realize just how deeply you've ruined your life." "Keep talking, trash," Wood mocked, drawing his weapon again and resting the barrel carelessly against the back of Kendrick's head. "I'm the one with the badge. I'm the one with the gun. And you're just another thug on the floor. Now we wait for the feds and I get my medal." Kendrick closed his eyes, calculating the seconds. He wasn't afraid. He was furious. He knew exactly what was coming next, and he knew that Brantley Wood was entirely unprepared for the hellstorm about to crash through the walls. The silence in the warehouse corridor was suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic, heavy breathing of Officer Wood and the distant, muffled hum of the city's traffic. Wood stood tall, his chest puffed out with sheer, intoxicating arrogance. He kept the barrel of his Glock pointed loosely toward Kendrick, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he waited for his glorious moment of recognition. He envisioned the federal agents walking in, shaking his hand, acknowledging that a street cop from the 14th District had outsmarted the $1 million task force. On the floor, Kendrick Hayes did not struggle against the violently tight handcuffs biting into his skin. His mind was violently detached, evaluating the spatial dynamics of the corridor. When Adler realized the wire had been severed, protocol dictated an immediate, overwhelming tactical response. The hostage rescue team would no longer treat this as a standard raid. They would treat it as an active hostage situation involving a downed federal agent. "You know, you feds really are a joke," Wood taunted, mistaking Kendrick's silence for submission. "You come into our city, acting like you own the streets, wearing your fancy suits. But when it comes down to actual police work, you guys don't know the first thing about cornering a rat. It takes real police to clean up this garbage." "You didn't clear the corners of this room when you entered," Kendrick noted quietly, his voice devoid of any emotion. Wood frowned, irritated by the calm correction. "What?" "You breached a fatal funnel without checking your corners," Kendrick continued, his eyes locked onto a speck of dust on the concrete. "You announced your presence from a position of disadvantage. You failed to search the suspect properly after detaining him, deliberately ignoring stated evidence of identity. And you cut my communication line to my team." Kendrick finally shifted his head, looking up at Wood with a gaze that made the young cop's stomach suddenly, inexplicably drop. "You aren't a real cop, Wood. You're a liability with a complex, and your time is up." Before Wood could formulate a witty, degrading response, the air pressure in the warehouse violently shifted. It started as a low rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor, traveling up Wood's boots. Then came the deafening sound of a reinforced steel exterior door being blown entirely off its structural hinges by a shaped C4 breaching charge. The explosion rocked the corridor, raining dust and rust down from the ceiling. Wood stumbled backward, his ears ringing violently, temporary panic flashing across his face. "What the hell?" he yelled, raising his weapon toward the far end of the hallway. "Drop your weapon, Wood," Kendrick commanded, his voice slicing through the ringing in the air. "Drop it right now and put your hands on your head." "Shut up!" Wood screamed, his panic quickly mutating into defensive aggression. He aimed his gun down the dark corridor, completely unaware of the shadow operators already swarming the perimeter. 4 flashbang grenades detonated simultaneously in the adjoining rooms. The blinding white light and deafening concussive blasts completely disoriented Wood, blinding him. He threw an arm over his eyes, stumbling blindly. Through the thick, acrid smoke, laser sights cut like surgical blades. Red and green beams intersected through the haze, every single one of them locking dead center onto Brantley Wood's chest, neck, and forehead. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed like war drums as 24 FBI SWAT operators materialized from the smoke. They were heavily armored in tactical Kevlar, brandishing suppressed M4 carbines, their faces hidden behind dark ballistic helmets and goggles. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now! Do it!" screamed the lead operator, his voice an absolute force of nature that echoed off the concrete. Wood froze, utterly paralyzed by the overwhelming display of force. He looked at the lasers painting his chest. He looked at the sea of federal agents closing in, their weapons raised with lethal intent. His arrogant facade instantly crumbled, replaced by naked, unadulterated terror. His hands began to shake so violently that he nearly dropped his Glock. "I'm a cop!" Wood shrieked, his voice cracking, sounding like a terrified child. "I'm Baltimore PD. I'm on your side. I got the suspect. Drop the gun, or you will be neutralized," another operator roared, advancing aggressively, the muzzle of his rifle mere inches from Wood's face. Wood finally released the weapon. It clattered loudly onto the floor. Immediately, two heavily armored operators slammed into him, tackling him against the concrete wall with enough force to knock the wind completely out of his lungs. They ripped his arms behind his back, securing him with heavy zip ties before he could even process what was happening. From the back of the tactical formation, Supervisory Special Agent Doyle Adler stepped forward. Adler was a towering, imposing figure in a perfectly tailored dark suit, completely contrasting the militarized gear of his team. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying fury. He didn't even look at Wood yet. Adler walked straight to Kendrick. He knelt down, pulling a specialized key from his pocket and unlocking the police handcuffs. "Are you hit, Kendrick?" Adler asked, his voice tight with concern as he helped the undercover agent to his feet. Kendrick rubbed his raw, bruised wrists, rolling his injured shoulder backward with a wince. "I'm fine, Dave. Just a bruised ego and a damaged wire." Wood, pinned against the wall by two massive SWAT operators, watched this exchange with wide, disbelieving eyes. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him pale and sickly. His mind desperately tried to reject the reality unfolding right in front of him. "Sir," Wood stammered, his voice trembling uncontrollably as he looked at Adler. "Sir, I caught him. He was guarding the stash. He's one of Holloway's guys." Adler turned slowly. The look in the veteran agent's eyes was absolute murder. He walked over to Wood, stopping just inches from the young officer's face. "This man," Adler began, his voice a low, terrifying growl that carried more weight than any shouted command, "is Supervisory Special Agent Kendrick Hayes. He is a 12-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the lead undercover operative for a multi-agency task force. He has spent the last 8 months risking his life to dismantle a cartel that you couldn't even dream of taking down." Wood opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His throat tightened, a sickening wave of nausea washing over him. "He told you who he was," Adler continued, stepping closer, forcing Wood to press the back of his head against the wall. "He told you where his badge was. He told you to contact your supervisor, and you deliberately chose to ignore him. You assaulted a federal agent, you compromised a $2 million federal operation, and you pointed a loaded firearm at the head of one of my best men." I didn't know," Wood whispered weakly. The arrogant bravado entirely erased, replaced by the crushing realization that his life as he knew it was over. He didn't look like an FBI agent. He looked like... "Like what?" Kendrick interrupted, stepping forward. He brushed the dust off his charcoal hoodie, his posture radiating immense, undeniable authority. "Like a criminal? Like a thug? Because I'm black and wearing a hoodie in West Baltimore?" Wood swallowed hard, unable to meet Kendrick's piercing gaze. "You didn't see an agent because you didn't want to see one," Kendrick said, his voice cold and resolute. "You wanted to play hero. You wanted to profile a suspect, rough him up, and get a pat on the back. Well, congratulations, Officer Wood. You just made the arrest of a lifetime." Adler gestured to the two SWAT operators holding Wood. "Strip him of his badge, his radio, and his secondary weapon. Read him his Miranda rights. Then throw him in the back of the transport van. He is now in federal custody." As the operators aggressively yanked Wood away from the wall, beginning to recite his rights, the young cop looked back one last time. He saw Kendrick Hayes calmly retrieving his FBI badge from his left pocket, clipping it to his belt, and walking back into the warehouse to finish the job that Wood had nearly destroyed. The cold, heavy chains of reality finally locked around Wood's wrists, mirroring the handcuffs he had so eagerly slapped on an innocent man just minutes before. The chaotic echo of the explosive breach faded, replaced by the sharp, tactical staccato of FBI hostage rescue team operators systematically clearing the remaining sectors of Warehouse 4. Dust particles danced in the beams of heavy flashlights as heavily armored agents secured the loading bays, zip-tying the few low-level cartel guards who had been stunned into submission by the overwhelming show of force. Supervisory Special Agent Kendrick Hayes stood in the center of the makeshift cartel office, his breathing finally returning to a steady, rhythmic baseline. He watched as the tactical medics quickly evaluated a scrape on his neck, left behind by the abrasive edge of Officer Brantley Wood's tactical vest. Dismissing the medic with a polite wave, Kendrick refocused his sharp intellect entirely on the mission. Supervisory Special Agent Doyle Adler stepped into the room, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. He barked a series of rapid-fire orders to the command center, ensuring the local police department's dispatch was entirely locked out of the operational loop. He ended the call, slipping the phone into his jacket pocket, and turned to Kendrick, his expression grave. "The perimeter is fully secured by our people now," Adler said, his voice dropping an octave so as not to carry into the corridor. "I just had a very unpleasant conversation with the local police commissioner. He's mortified. But mortified doesn't recover lost assets. What did we actually manage to secure before that trigger-happy rookie blew the stealth approach?" Kendrick moved toward the rusted lockbox, snapping a pair of latex gloves over his bruised wrists. "We got enough to cripple their logistics, Dave. But we missed the head of the snake. My wire was transmitting for 40 minutes before Wood destroyed it. I secured high-definition photographs of the master ledgers, detailing offshore accounts routed through shell corporations in the Caymans, directly linking Damian Holloway to the money laundering operations. Burner communication logs, the unencrypted IMA numbers of the phones used by the syndicate street captains over the last 3 weeks. Port Authority bribes, a physical list of corrupted dock workers and customs inspectors who have been turning a blind eye to the shipping containers carrying the narcotics. "It's a gold mine of paper evidence," Kendrick continued, carefully bagging the ledgers into transparent, tamper-evident evidence sacks. "But paper doesn't put handcuffs on Damian Holloway today. Because we were forced to breach early to save my life, the secondary raid team at the waterfront had to hold their position. Holloway's lieutenants weren't in the building when we hit it. They are ghosts again." Adler slammed his fist against the reinforced steel doorframe, the sudden violence a rare crack in his usually stoic demeanor. 18 months. 18 months of you risking your life in the deep cover, sleeping with one eye open, and it gets kneecapped because some glory hound beat cop couldn't follow a simple hold the line order. Ego is the great destroyer of tactical operations. The moment an officer believes he is bigger than the mission is already dead. An old FBI Academy adage Kendrick had memorized years ago. Before Adler could spiral further into his justified fury, heavy footsteps approached the office. 2 SWAT operators escorted a visibly trembling older police officer into the room. It was Sergeant Thomas O'Malley, Wood's partner. O'Malley looked as though he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. He held his uniform hat in his hands, his knuckles white from the pressure. "Agents!" O'Malley rasped, his voice cracking with a mixture of shame and lingering adrenaline. I tried to stop him. I ordered him to stay in the cruiser. He heard a noise violation on the local band and thought the cartel was slipping out. He just snapped. He wanted a medal." Kendrick studied the veteran sergeant. He possessed a seasoned detective's ability to read micro-expressions, and what he saw in O'Malley's eyes wasn't deception. It was profound, soul-crushing regret. "Sergeant," Kendrick said softly, stepping forward, "did you broadcast your position on an unencrypted local channel when you tried to call him back?" O'Malley flinched, the color draining further from his already pale face. "When he ran, I panicked. I keyed the radio. I told him to fall back because the FBI hadn't breached yet. I I use the open frequency. Adler let out a sharp, cynical laugh, shaking his head. And there it is. The fatal error. What do you mean? O'Malley asked, his voice barely a whisper. We know the Holloway Syndicate employs counter-surveillance, Kendrick explained, his tone clinical and detached, stripping the emotion from the catastrophic failure. They run deep web scanners that constantly monitor local PD frequencies. They don't have access to our federal encrypted lines, which is exactly why we ordered your precinct to maintain absolute radio silence. Adler stepped closer to O'Malley, pointing a sharp finger at the sergeant's chest. When Officer Wood keyed his mic to brag about neutralizing a suspect, and when you keyed yours to scream about the FBI breach, you didn't just talk to each other. You broadcasted our entire operational timeline to every cartel lieutenant within a 50-mile radius holding a scanner. You rang the dinner bell, Sergeant. Holloway is gone. His enforcers are gone. They likely burned their secondary safe houses the second they heard Wood's voice. O'Malley closed his eyes. A single tear of utter defeat, escaping and tracing a line through the dirt on his cheek. I'm sorry. God help me. I am so sorry. Sorry doesn't fix this, Adler replied coldly. Your badge and gun go to the Internal Affairs captain, waiting outside. You are suspended pending a full federal inquiry. Get him out of my sight. As the SWAT operators led the devastated sergeant away, Kendrick stared down at the broken wire earpiece resting on the concrete floor. The physical damage to the equipment was minimal, but the tactical damage was astronomical. Brantley Wood hadn't just assaulted a federal agent. Through his aggressive ignorance and racial profiling, he had inadvertently acted as the cartel's most effective early warning system. Kendrick picked up the shattered earpiece. Dave, prep an interrogation room at the field office. Strip Wood of his uniform and put him in federal holding greens. He thinks he's just in trouble for roughing up a cop. He doesn't realize he's about to be investigated for criminal conspiracy. Adler nodded, a predatory gleam returning to his eyes. I'll make sure the room is exceptionally cold. The interrogation room, deep within the basement of the FBI's Baltimore field office, was a masterclass in psychological discomfort. The walls were painted a sterile, oppressive gray. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a low, headache-inducing hum. The air conditioning was cranked down to a frigid 60 degrees, ensuring that whoever sat in the metal chair bolted to the center of the floor could never truly relax. Officer Brantley Wood had been sitting in that chair for exactly 4 hours and 22 minutes. He was no longer wearing the dark blue uniform that gave him his false sense of invincibility. He had been stripped of his badge, his Kevlar vest, his duty belt, and his boots. He now wore a cheap, oversized, bright orange federal holding jumpsuit. His bare feet were shoved into thin, paper-like slippers. His wrists, heavily bruised from the zip ties, were handcuffed to an iron ring, anchored to the heavy steel table in front of him. The silence was breaking him. Wood had spent the first hour angrily demanding his union representative, screaming at the two-way mirror that this was a misunderstanding, a simple jurisdictional mix-up. By the second hour, the anger had mutated into anxiety. He paced as far as the short chain would allow, biting his fingernails to the quick. By the fourth hour, the crushing reality of federal custody had completely shattered his ego. He sat slumped in the chair, shivering violently, his eyes red and swollen. The heavy steel door finally clicked open. Kendrick Hayes walked into the room, followed closely by Doyle Adler. Kendrick had changed out of his undercover street clothes. He was now wearing a sharply tailored, dark navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subtle blue tie. He looked every inch the elite federal agent that Wood had previously refused to see. He carried a thick, aggressively overflowing manila folder. Adler leaned against the closed door, crossing his arms over his chest, his face an impenetrable wall of stone. Kendrick walked to the table, pulling out the chair opposite Wood. He sat down slowly, placing the heavy folder on the steel surface with a loud, definitive thud. For a long, agonizing minute, Kendrick said nothing. He simply stared across the table at the young, broken man. He didn't look at Wood with anger or hatred. He looked at him with profound, absolute pity. And for someone like Wood, whose entire identity was built on aggressive dominance, that pity was worse than a physical blow. I want my union rep, Wood stammered, his voice weak and trembling, refusing to make eye contact with Kendrick. Your union representative was contacted 3 hours ago, Kendrick stated, his voice smooth, calm, and utterly devastating. He spoke directly to the Assistant United States Attorney. When he heard the preliminary list of charges, he advised the union to immediately distance themselves from you. You are on your own, Brantley. Wood's head snapped up, panic flaring in his eyes. They can't do that. I pay my dues. I made a mistake. It was dark. You were wearing a hoodie. You didn't look like an agent. And what does an FBI agent look like, Brantley? Kendrick asked, leaning forward slightly, interlacing his fingers on the table. Because I clearly verbally identified myself. I instructed you on exactly where to find my credentials. I complied with your unlawful commands. The only reason you didn't see an agent is because your bias blinded you to reality. You saw a black man in a hoodie in West Baltimore, and your prejudices wrote a narrative that justified your violence. Wood opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. The cold, unblinking stare of the man he had violently assaulted paralyzed him. Kendrick opened the thick folder. Let's review the current trajectory of your life. As of this exact moment, the Department of Justice is preparing an indictment against you for the following federal offenses. Iwanho USC. Paragraph 111. Assaulting, resisting, or impeding a federal officer with a dangerous weapon. 18 USC. Paragraph 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. 18 USC. Paragraph 1505. Obstruction of proceedings before departments, agencies, and committees. These aren't local civilian complaints that your sympathetic precinct captain can make disappear into a filing cabinet, Kendrick explained, his tone conversational, but laced with lethal finality. These are federal felonies. The assault charge alone carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. The deprivation of rights adds another 10, and that is before we even discuss the destruction of specialized federal surveillance equipment. Wood began to hyperventilate. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. "Please," he choked out, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "Please, Agent Hayes, I'm sorry. I swear to God, I am so sorry. You have to believe me. I didn't know." "I don't care if you're sorry, Brantley," Kendrick replied coldly. "I care about the damage you caused. Because your assault on me is actually the least of your problems right now." Adler pushed off the door and stepped into the light, placing a small audio recording device on the table. He pressed a button. The room filled with the static-laced recording of Wood's arrogant voice. "Sergeant O'Malley, this is Wood. I've secured a high-value suspect inside the East Wing. Armed, aggressive, but neutralized. Tell those federal stiffs they can come in now and do the paperwork. I did their job for them." Adler stopped the recording. "Do you know who else heard that transmission, Officer Wood? The Holloway Syndicate. Because you couldn't keep your mouth shut, because you just had to brag on an unencrypted channel, you alerted the cartel to the raid." Wood stared at the recorder, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. No, No, that's a local channel. They couldn't. They have scanners, Kendrick interrupted sharply. They monitor local police bands to track patrol movements. The moment you spoke, Damien Holloway's top lieutenants aborted their arrival at the warehouse. They burned their secondary locations. They vanished. A multi-million-dollar, 18-month federal operation was entirely derailed because you wanted to play cowboy. I didn't mean to, Wood cried out, pulling frantically at the handcuffs, the metal clinking loudly against the iron ring. I was trying to help. I thought I was making a bust. Kendrick slammed his hand down on the table, the sudden, violent sound instantly silencing Wood. You were trying to feed your ego. Kendrick's voice finally rose, filling the small room with overwhelming authority. You compromised federal intelligence. You aided the escape of a high-level narcotics trafficker, which means Brantley, the United States Attorney, is currently drafting a 4th charge, conspiracy to aid and abet a known criminal syndicate. No! Wood screamed, terror ripping through his vocal cords. No, I'm not dirty. I'm not with them. I swear on my mother's life, I don't work for Holloway. I'm just a cop. You're not a cop anymore, Adler corrected, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. You're a federal inmate looking at 40 years in a supermax prison where every inmate knows you used to wear a badge. You are finished. Wood broke completely. He slumped forward, resting his forehead against the cold steel table, sobbing hysterically. The arrogant, swaggering predator from the alleyway was gone, completely eradicated by the immense, crushing weight of federal justice. He wept for his career, for his freedom, and for the undeniable reality that his own bigotry and hubris had destroyed his life. Kendrick watched the man cry, feeling no satisfaction, only a deep, profound weariness. He slowly closed the manila folder. There is exactly one path forward for you, Wood, Kendrick said softly, waiting for the disgraced officer to lift his tear-streaked face. You're going to tell me absolutely everything about your precinct. Every rumor, every off-book meeting, every officer who suddenly bought a new boat or a sports car on a patrolman's salary, because someone in your district has been feeding Holloway our operational timelines for months, and your little stunt just proved it. Kendrick stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. You have exactly 24 hours to decide if you want to be a cooperative witness against a corrupt department, or if you want to take the fall as Holloway's inside man. Choose wisely, because this is the absolute last time I will ever offer you a lifeline. Without waiting for an answer, Kendrick turned and walked out of the freezing interrogation room, leaving Brantley Wood chained to the table, entirely alone in the suffocating ruins of his own making. Dawn broke over the Baltimore skyline, casting a pallid, bruised light through the reinforced glass of the FBI field office. The city was waking up, completely unaware of the seismic shifts occurring in its criminal underworld. Inside the Tactical Command Center, Supervisory Special Agent Kendrick Hayes stood over a sprawling map of the city's industrial sectors, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand. The bruises on his wrists had deepened to a dark purple, a physical reminder of the previous day's catastrophic failure. But his mind was already 10 steps ahead. Supervisory Special Agent Doyle Adler marched into the command center, his face tight with exhaustion, but his eyes burning with renewed predatory focus. He tossed a decrypted burner phone onto the briefing table. Wood finally broke completely, Adler announced, his voice slicing through the low murmur of the intelligence analysts working at their terminals. He spent 3 hours crying for his mother, and then he started singing. He gave us a name, Kendrick, a very big, very heavily protected name. Kendrick set his coffee down, his posture instantly straightening. Who has been leaking our operational timelines to the Holloway Syndicate? Captain Richard Miller, Adler replied, pulling up a digital dossier on the main projection screen. Commanding officer of the 14th District, Wood's ultimate superior. A heavy silence fell over the command center. Captain Richard Miller was a 30-year veteran of the Baltimore Police Department, a decorated officer who had practically built his career on taking down organized crime in the 90s. But the digital dossier Adler displayed painted a vastly different, deeply disturbing picture. According to Wood, the rumors in the locker room were that Miller was deeply in debt to offshore bookies, Adler explained, tapping the screen to highlight a series of financial anomalies. 3 months ago, the debt magically vanished. Suddenly, Miller's ex-wife got her alimony paid in full, and his daughter's Ivy League tuition was covered by an anonymous trust. Wood said Miller personally altered the patrol routes around the docks whenever the cartel had a shipment coming in. He didn't just alter patrol routes, Kendrick deduced, his mind connecting the scattered puzzle pieces with terrifying speed. He gave Damian Holloway our encrypted raid schedules. That's why the secondary safe houses were empty. Miller tipped them off the moment he heard Wood compromise the perimeter. Exactly, Adler nodded grimly. Wood is a bigoted, arrogant fool, but he isn't dirty. He was just the chaotic catalyst that Miller used to cover his tracks. But now, we have an unprecedented opportunity to turn this disaster into a master stroke. Kendrick stared at the map, a dangerous, brilliant plan forming in his mind. If Miller thinks Wood is just sitting in a local precinct holding cell, completely unaware of the larger conspiracy, we can use the rookie as bait. We need to make Miller believe Wood accidentally walked away with something the cartel desperately needs back. The 2 veteran agents quickly drafted an aggressive counterintelligence sting, codenamed Operation Judas Trap. They needed to flush Captain Miller out into the open, away from the protective fortress of his police precinct, and they needed to catch him directly interacting with the cartel. They marched back down to the freezing basement interrogation room. Wood was exactly where they had left him, a hollow, shivering shell of a man, his arrogant facade entirely eradicated. "We verified your intel, Brantley," Kendrick said, tossing a fresh, neatly pressed set of street clothes onto the steel table. "Captain Miller is dirty. Now, you are going to help us catch him. If you do this exactly as I instruct, the United States Attorney will drop the conspiracy charge. You will still go to federal prison for assaulting me, but you will see daylight again before you turn 50. Wood nodded frantically, his hands shaking as Adler unlocked his handcuffs. "Anything. I'll do anything. What do you need me to do?" Kendrick leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, commanding whisper. "You are going to use this secure line to call Captain Miller. You're going to tell him that before the FBI arrested you, you pocketed one of the cartel's master ledger drives from the warehouse office. Tell him you want $100,000 in cash and safe passage out of the city, or you are handing the drive directly to Internal Affairs." Wood swallowed hard, terror flashing in his eyes. "He'll kill me. If he's working for Holloway, they will just kill me." "They will certainly try," Adler countered with a grim smile. "Which is why we will be waiting for them." The phone call was agonizingly tense. Wood's voice shook, but the sheer, unadulterated panic in his tone actually sold the lie perfectly. Captain Miller, blinded by his own desperation to tie up loose ends, took the bait. He agreed to meet Wood at an abandoned shipping yard on the southern edge of the harbor at midnight, promising to bring the cash. "He took it," Wood whispered, dropping the phone on the table as if it were a live grenade. "Good," Kendrick said, adjusting his tactical holster. "Now, we hunt the real predators." Midnight arrived with a torrential, punishing downpour. Rain lashed against the rusted shipping containers that formed a labyrinthine maze at the southern harbor. The only illumination came from the flickering, jaundiced glow of a single sodium street lamp, casting long, menacing shadows across the slick, oil-stained asphalt. Hidden in the suffocating darkness atop a crane, an FBI sniper team maintained overwatch, their thermal scopes cutting through the rain. Dozens of hostage rescue team operators were seamlessly blended into the environment, completely invisible, their suppressed rifles raised and ready. In the center of the kill zone stood Brantley Wood. He wore a heavy rain slicker, clutching a waterproof envelope tightly to his chest. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every shadow looked like a cartel assassin. Every gust of wind sounded like a suppressed gunshot. He was completely terrified, realizing for the first time in his life what it actually felt like to be completely vulnerable and outgunned. Tires hissed against the wet pavement as a sleek black SUV rolled slowly into the shipping yard, its headlights cutting aggressively through the torrential rain. The vehicle came to a halt 20 yards from Wood. The driver's door opened, and Captain Richard Miller stepped out. He was a large, imposing man, wrapped in a heavy trench coat. But he didn't come alone. The rear doors of the SUV opened, and two massive, heavily armed cartel enforcers stepped out, their hands resting menacingly on the grips of submachine guns slung across their chests. A corrupt cop is more dangerous than 100 gangsters, because a corrupt cop knows exactly where the blind spots are. You always were a chaotic, stupid liability, Wood, Miller called out, his voice easily carrying over the pouring rain. He didn't have a bag of cash. He had his service weapon drawn, resting it casually against his thigh. You should have stayed in the cruiser. You should have minded your own business. I have the drive, Captain, Wood yelled back, his voice cracking violently. Just give me the money and I'm gone. I swear. There is no money, Brantley, Miller sneered, raising his weapon with cold, calculated intent. There is only a tragic story about a disgraced rookie who couldn't handle the pressure and took his own life at the docks. Before Miller could fully level his weapon, the trap snapped shut with devastating, overwhelming violence. FBI, drop your weapons. Do it now! The command didn't come from a distance. It came from directly behind Miller. Supervisory Special Agent Kendrick Hayes emerged from the blind spot behind the SUV, moving with a fluid, terrifying speed that defied the heavy tactical gear he wore. He had slipped past the cartel enforcer's perimeter entirely undetected. Miller panicked, spinning around to aim at the sudden threat. But Kendrick was already there. With brutal, calculated efficiency, Kendrick parried Miller's gun hand away, stepping inside the captain's guard. Kendrick drove his elbow viciously into Miller's sternum, knocking the breath completely out of the corrupt officer, and then swept his legs, slamming the captain violently onto the wet asphalt. Simultaneously, 4 blinding flashbangs detonated around the cartel enforcers. The blinding light and concussive shockwave dropped the mercenaries to their knees, disoriented and deafened. In less than 3 seconds, 24 heavily armored FBI operators swarmed the men, disarming them and pinning them to the ground with overwhelming, absolute force. Kendrick knelt over Captain Miller, pressing the barrel of his rifle firmly against the corrupt officer's chest. The rain washed the blood from Miller's split lip. Captain Richard Miller, Kendrick said, his voice as cold and unforgiving as the storm raging around them. You are under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and attempted murder of a federal witness. Your career is over. Miller stared up at the black federal agent, his eyes wide with shock and defeat. He had underestimated the FBI, and he had entirely underestimated Kendrick Hayes. Doyle Adler stepped into the light of the street lamp, completely ignoring the rain soaking his suit. He looked down at Miller with absolute disgust, then turned his attention to Wood, who had collapsed onto his knees in the puddles, weeping openly. "Secure the prisoners," Adler ordered the tactical team, his voice echoing with final authority. "Operation Judas Trap is a complete success." The aftermath. The fallout from that rainy night at the docks completely reshaped the landscape of Baltimore law enforcement. Captain Richard Miller was indicted on 22 federal charges. Facing a mountain of incontrovertible evidence and the testimonies of the cartel enforcers who quickly flipped, he pleaded guilty to avoid a life sentence. He received 35 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The Holloway syndicate collapsed within weeks. Without Miller's protection, and with the master ledgers finally secured from a secondary raid, Damian Holloway was apprehended by Kendrick Hayes in a raid in Miami a month later. Brantley Wood stood before a federal judge 3 months later. Stripped of his badge, his arrogance, and his freedom, he pleaded guilty to assaulting a federal agent. The judge, noting Wood's crucial cooperation in the sting, but refusing to ignore the sheer malice of his initial profiling, sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison. As Wood was led out of the courtroom in heavy steel shackles, the very same kind he had so eagerly and aggressively snapped onto Kendrick's wrists, he looked back toward the gallery. Kendrick Hayes stood there, his posture perfect, his expression completely unreadable. He offered no smile, no gloating, and no forgiveness. He simply watched as the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung shut, sealing the fate of a man whose own bigotry had been his ultimate, devastating undoing. Kendrick turned and walked out of the courthouse, adjusting his suit jacket. There were still other syndicates to dismantle, other corrupt officials to expose. The mission never truly ended. But today, justice had been served. Cold and absolute. Wow, what a roller coaster of justice and suspense. If you were on the edge of your seat, watching this arrogant rookie learn the ultimate lesson in respect, hit that like button right now. We bring you the most intense, real-life, inspired law enforcement stories every single week, packed with twists you will never see coming. Don't forget to share this video with your true crime-loving friends, and smash that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss a thrilling update. Drop a comment below. Did Wood get what he deserved? See you in the next thrilling episode.